Cool. So I wanted to talk today about kind of, I mean, it applies to React, but just kind of more broadly into the ecosystem. Our process of development as web developers and this new build tool that I found out about recently called Snowpack, which I think is kind of neat. And I saw some other people on Twitter hitting it up and liking it, like Rich Harris, who created Rollup, was pretty excited about it. Made some pretty ambitious claims. So I thought I'd just kind of give a 5,000-foot view. I'm by no means an expert, and especially not when it comes to dealing with issues like module types. So I'll do my best at the end to answer questions if you guys have them, but no guarantees that I'm going to have the answer because some of this stuff is way deeper than I would handle on a daily basis. So to start with, I just wanted to start back with kind of where we used to be as web developers. Luckily, I didn't have to do this, but I know that it definitely was a thing where it used to be that we could just, have script tags directly in the browser, and we could link out to, if we need a jQuery, we could just have a script tag for jQuery, have our regular script, which was using jQuery, and kind of just go on about our way. But obviously, this caused a couple issues, one of which is kind of outlined by this slide here that I did accidentally, which was things like orders of the scripts actually mattered. So for example, if my first script tag was using jQuery before I actually imported it, that wouldn't work. And in addition to that, for making requests with HTTP1, we could only make so many simultaneous requests. So if I had, say, 15 or 20 script tags, I might have to batch those 5 at a time, meaning I get the first 5, the second 5, the third 5, and then finally maybe the last 5, and then I have all the JavaScript I need on my page. So when you started to go to our good old friend IE, our performance was, potentially terrible due to its limited number of connections. And so what kind of evolved from this then was the idea of bundling. And so with bundling, which is, still what we use today for the most part, we took all these kind of imports and exports that we had within our code. We were able to modularize things nicely, and then we were able to create, a single file that we could send over to the browser. And what that meant was we didn't have to worry so much about things like ordering the script tags properly. And also, it provided us with kind of a cleaner and conciser way of reasoning about our dependencies. So rather than having a script file that implicitly depended on the fact that jQuery had already been declared, within our JavaScript files, we could see via import statements, oh, I'm using jQuery in this file, so I need to import it. And so with bundling, we get some nice kind of build tools like Gulp and Grunt. And we also got Babel, so we could do things like polyfill. So if there were features in IE or in Firefox that weren't available in Chrome or vice versa, we could backfill those, and we could make that part of our tool chain. And we could also make things like dealing with assets part of the tool chain with these task runners. And then, frameworks kind of started to get really popular, right? And we know that with React specifically, with our JSX, under the hood, Babel is going to go ahead and transpile that and make that into regular JavaScript calls. So having something like Babel was really great for us because we could write really declarative code in JSX and have that kind of behind the scenes transpiled for us and polyfilled for us. And other frameworks also rely on Babel as well to do similar things. But the issue was, it was still kind of cumbersome with these task runners of Gulp and Grunt. And, they had their own kind of plugin systems, their own kind of quirks. But in terms of kind of really getting fine-grained control over, things like creating bundles or, asset pipelines that you may want to handle in a certain way, there wasn't as much flexibility as we might have wanted. And so we kind of got Webpack. Now, Webpack is, broadly speaking, I would argue is probably the de facto standard for us right now. So anything that we're used to using, like Create React App, Angular CLI, this is what we're using under the hood. And it's great because not only does it allow us to do things with our JavaScript, but it also has such a rich plugin and ecosystem that we can do things that we weren't able to do, or that would be potentially very difficult with previous task runners. And so it's made things really great, because whereas before, we might not have had as much control over the number of bundles or the size of our bundles, with Webpack, it kind of took it a step further, made that process a little bit easier. And so what we ended up being able to do, skip ahead, was go ahead and start to look into, okay, you know what, I might have a vendor bundle with these particular dependencies that is used by these 3 particular pages. And so it allowed us to kind of take the next logical step into developing performant web applications. And as my slide alluded to, it didn't come without its fair share of problems, though, right? Being classified as a Webpack expert is arguably its own job definition, right? 9 times out of 10, you've got a Webpack problem. You run over to somebody who does Webpack on a daily basis, because your configuration is God knows how long, and there's dependencies. It's beautiful when it works properly, but sometimes it can be kind of cumbersome and, frankly, confusing. So this is a line taken from Snowpack's website, where they say that Create React App has 200 megabytes of dependencies and about 600 lines of Webpack config internally. Now, to be fair, that is also allowing you to do things like, Sass, CSS, import images directly into your JavaScript file. So it's not really bare bones. So I would kind of take this with a grain of salt. But the point I want to drive home here is, it's not quite as simple as a few lines of configuration, right? Also, as you start to work on larger projects and you start to kind of deal with this idea of performance and so chunks, it's not an easy issue. Like, at what point do we decide that, a library is used enough that we want to split it out, put it in its own bundle so that it can be cached in the browser? Does it need to be used by 3 pages, 4 pages? Does it need to be a certain size? There's no real hard and fast rule for these sorts of things. And so what you can end up with is situations where, you're in an Explorer like this, looking through your dependencies and trying to figure these things out. But what if we didn't have to? What if we could have a web where bundling wasn't really a concern anymore, right? I mean, in our code, we don't have to worry about it at all. We can just kind of do imports and exports without any issue. It's really the browser where we had to be concerned about these chunks, right? And these grouping of our code and dependencies simultaneously together. So we kind of got a big step forward when we got HTTP2. And what HTTP2 did for us was allow us to have basically, I don't know the exact number. I'm going to argumentatively say as many. There's probably a limit, but as many HTTP connections over a single port as we wanted, right? So that issue where we had, 5 simultaneous connections, well, now we have 1 connection, but we can actually request many, many files in parallel. So that kind of issue of, only being able to get 5 at a time was kind of alleviated, with the exception of IE and Opera Mini, which we'll see are 2 kind of outliers for most of this. And then the other big step, which has been about the past, I guess about 5 years from what I've seen to get to the browser, is browsers supporting ECMAScript modules. And so this is where I'm kind of going to give if I'm giving a 5,000 foot view of Webpack, I'm going to give you a 10,000 foot view of module systems, because it is a rabbit hole in itself. But basically, ECMAScript modules are those that we're used to writing, where we have, imports. So import whatever from whatever, as opposed to kind of a common JS style, which is that require type syntax that we're used to seeing in Node. So this is great, right? We've got these 2 things. And so Snowpack, the idea behind it is to leverage these 2 ideas, to leverage the fact that, hey, you know what? We can do something as simple as requiring in our dependencies. You know, maybe we don't need to bundle them with code anymore. And if we don't do that, and instead I'm just requiring React from a global CDN, well, if I do that and then some other app comes along and requires it from the same endpoint as a dependency, and it's just an import statement, you know, we can cache that, right? And so performance is also at the forefront, but even better than that is kind of this statement here, and it's not quite true in the case of React, but the idea is that it also makes our development experiences much, much better. Because before, as you work on a larger and larger scale application, what you may find is when you save files, even though we have hot module reloading and we have dev servers, it can still take a little bit of time to see those updates reflected in the browser. And a good chunk of the reason why is that this bundling is happening behind the scenes, right? So something like Webpack is figuring out, oh, okay, you imported React. Well, now beside this code, I'm going to shove React in there so that you can make calls as appropriate to create elements or do whatever you need to do. The idea with Snowpack is everything that you have as a node module, after you install it, you run a single command called Snowpack. It copies those over to a web module directory for you, and then you just simply import those using ECMAScript modules. And so I'll show you guys an example of that when we get into the code. But again, the idea of bundling dependencies in with our code is separated. And so the two main advantages are, for us as developers, the actual time required to have our changes reflected in the browser, although not order one or constant time like that slide said, because we as React developers still have to put our code through Babel. If you were writing pure JavaScript, it would be constant time, much lower. So what I want to do is just show you guys a demo of this here. So I've got a pretty small React app here. Basically, all I have is Babel, some basic React. There's a few things that I just want to point out. I'll talk more about these when I get to some of the kind of cons of this build tool. But the main thing you'll notice here is with this script tag, we have this type of module. And so VS Code's really nice because it'll actually tell me here, for HTML5 compliant browsers, it's treated as a JavaScript module, blah, 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 blah. So long story short, if you've ever seen script tags before, you're usually used to seeing something like text/JavaScript. What we need to do is say, you know what, this is a JavaScript module, so it gets treated a little differently. The other thing you'll notice is I've already run the Snowpack command. So what I have in web modules here is I have React and React DOM. So they've been copied over from node modules into my web modules directory so that we know how to properly import those in the browser. And the last kind of got you is with ECMAScript modules, the file extension gets really picky. So where before we can usually just say, yeah, import app from app. We actually need to specify the file extension. And I'm sure there's a Babel plugin to get rid of this, but at least in this simplistic example, I didn't bother putting it in. And so with those few little things, oh, see, I told you I was looking at bundlephobia. We can have, a regular JavaScript, a regular React application, running. And the really neat part is, you can see that React and React DOM, right? They were just gone ahead, network call made, in this case to the web modules directory, but they were just gone ahead and pulled in as if they were regular scripts, right? So if we look at the actual Babel output code, what's happening here is basically there's a small transformation that takes place to say, hey, import React from this web modules directory that I have, right? And so it's just going ahead, pulling that React function out, doing what it needs to do. But behind the scenes, like in our network tab here, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about the Pika project and kind of the global CDN idea. But these could, in theory, be all parallel requests. So maybe I have, 15, 20, however many node modules I need, hopefully not too many. And they could all be made just as regular requests like this from a CDN. You can make those, you get those, and the code stays this simple. So there's no more need to have to worry about throwing React in here or dealing with bundle size and splitting things out. We can use our ECMAScript modules to help take care of that. Let me go back to the presentation real quick. But obviously there's some limitations. And we talked about some of them. So file name extension is one, right? The other main one is, I've said the word ECMAScript about 8,000 times right now. Everything that I've shown here is ES modules. And so it turns out that the version of React I'm using is actually kind of a special version in that it's an ECMAScript version of React. So what does that mean? Well, if you've ever looked at the React source code, the way that it's exported, it's just exported basically as one big kind of iffy, right? So you've got an immediately invoked function. They do that to avoid scope, and they just give you the whole thing. And so when you're doing bundles, that's maybe not a bad thing if you need all those calls. But where it really starts to hurt us is in things like bundle size. So, for example, Lodash is infinitely terrible for this, where if you import one function, you might get all of Lodash. And so there's particular libraries like Lodash ES, which stands for ECMAScript, that aim to get around this, where you're just exporting the single function you need. And so I don't want to get too into performance here. But anyway, with tree shaking, things like that, it can be a lot better. So this has the potential to, if we get to a place where we have a common accepted way of writing modules, this could be a really big deal for us as web developers. It could enable a lot better development experience, a lot better actual performance in the web, right? And I think that's about it. The only thing that I wanted to mention is the CDN. So the kind of overarching people that make Snowpack, they're called Pika. And they've got a couple other projects here on the go. But one of the main things they have is this package catalog. And so you can kind of go in and you can actually view here which packages are or potentially are not ECMAScript module compliant. So, not to make you guys too dizzy, but if I hop back over, you'll see like I have Pika particular versions of React and React DOM so that they follow that ECMAScript standard, because the regular ones don't. I don't know why. That's a question for somebody who knows more about the module system than I do. But yeah, just something to keep in mind that right now things are still not quite there. You can make them happen, but there's still a little ways to go. And if you look at Snowpack, we'll kind of talk about, kind of like who should use it, what is it good for, things like that. And so I guess I should mention, if you do use Snowpack, but you still need to support browsers that don't yet support ECMAScript modules, that is, if you are needing to support IE11, and I feel terrible for you, you can run a build step at the end, which is still going to use a bundler for your production code. I think it uses Parcel under the hood, but I could be wrong. But overall, this is almost there, but I think it's cool enough to be on the radar. Whatever you want to do, and they also have some recipes. So I didn't follow the recipe, but in theory you could. And trying to think if there's anything else I forgot. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'll do my best. Is there, how do I stop? stop sharing.
So, hey, KG, I have a question. So if everyone started doing this and we were all, using React, then presumably wouldn't you start saving network time because you'd have like those React and React DOM scripts cached from the CDN?
Exactly. So like, I think it's Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson, or at least Michael Jackson runs like Unpackage. And it's that kind of idea where they just have a CDN of NPM packages. So I think the idea with these guys is eventually, and they kind of talk about this NPM package CDN where, I don't know, can you guys still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so similar to, I'm going to go off on other topics now, Dino, where you can have packages just be at a URL, right? So if I'm a browser and I come in and I go, oh yeah, Pika, Preact, great, have that, don't need it. You're exactly right, right? Whereas before, like, even if your app and my app use React, if they're bundled together, the browser's like, yeah, I've never seen this hash before, so I got to download the whole thing. So yes, I guess is the short answer.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? All right, now if I could just figure out how to stop sharing, that would be awesome. Where'd my little... Oh, it's over on this screen. My bad.
Great stuff.
Today I learned Michael Jackson was a developer. Cool. All right, yeah. I'll probably end up putting the slides up in the Slack channel, and I'm in the Slack channel if you guys have questions. And I'll try and throw those links up too, so you guys can go learn about it. But yeah, get excited. It's gonna be cool.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to playing around with that and seeing how that develops over time with like you said, HTTP or HTTP2 kind of changing the way things are done now. So it's going to be cool to see more of those changes in the future.